Style or performance? The Cougar Duoface Pro RGB gives you the option to choose between a glass front panel, which still allows the front fans to breathe through the side, so no worries there, nobody will get choked too much, or this mesh panel with quite big 5mm holes. Both feature their own distinct style and the choice is completely up to you, but before we get deeper into that feature, let's first roll back to the beginning. There are two versions of this case, the Airface Pro RGB and this Duoface Pro RGB. Obviously one comes with only the mesh panel pre-installed and the other one comes with both. And then there's also white and black. We here today will solely focus on the white Duoface Pro RGB, not to be mistaken with the non-Pro version, but I guess except for the glass panel, pretty much everything else should be the same for the Airface. So take that with a grain of salt, but consider this to be solely on the Duoface. The Cougar Duoface Pro RGB is a pretty average sized mid-tower case. Standing on the table, it is about 495mm high, 465mm deep and 242mm wide. It comes in a relatively standard brown carton box featuring some images, and inside we'll find the case itself with the glass panel pre-installed and an additional carton box containing the mesh panel. To open up the case, it's the standard with a twist. The 7.3mm tempered glass side panel is locked in by a screw in the back. After removing it, we need to use the handle at the top of the case to pop the panel off the magnets and pull it out. The back side is back to normal again. Two regular screws and off it goes. Inside the Cougar Duoface Pro RGB we can fit quite a stack of form factors. For the motherboard we can pretty much do anything we want, from mini ITX all the way up to regular ATX. We can theoretically also do eATX, but for that we need to remove that cable management bar on the right hand side of the motherboard, which is pretty easy once you remove the single screw that is keeping everything together. Or if you just want to give yourself some more space, like with regular ATX, you can also just move it a bit to the right. For CPU air coolers, it's quite the treat as well. We are looking at up to 190mm of space. So there is really very little that won't fit into this thing. GPU is basically a do whatever you want thing. We got about 390mm until we start hitting the front fans. And thanks to that triple vertical slot, cause yes, as long as you bring your own PCIe riser, which may or may not be from Cougar, you can turn that GPU around. And the nice positive side effect of this is that you got plenty of space in between the GPU and the tempered glass side panel in case that you are using that NVIDIA Octopus or that suicidal cable. For cooling we got a lot, but really not everything. The front is a triple 120 or two 140s, the same applies to the top, and in the back we have support for either a 120 or 140. And to top it off we also got another two 120s on top of the power supply shroud. As usual, these two bottom fans won't change the world. They got a bit of air, sure, it can come out in the bottom, but 3/4 of that spot, or of these two spots, is already blocked off by a very standard PSU, so don't expect too much here. It's more guiding than blowing. By default, a Duoface will come pretty much ready to go. Three 120 CR120 fans, W for the white ones and not W for the black version, in the front and another one in the back as exhaust. As far as I could measure, the three are spinning somewhere in between 1200 and 1100 RPM, and by using that included 4-to-1 splitter you can combine all of them to be used on a single header, which unfortunately isn't PWM, but who cares, you can just voltage control the whole thing and it's fine. I won't get too deep into the performance of these fans for now, but they will to some degree do a good job, like generally as for free fans. They do have a slight whistle noise to them, and even at low speeds you can hear that something is whispering in that bearing, which I can immediately hear because I got the Arctic P14s just next to them, but in a general sense, as free fans they are alright and they will do the job. So it's not perfect and definitely to be replaced if the budget allows it to, but they will do. The radiator support is pretty much a carbon copy. Up to 360 or 280 in the front, the same for the top, and either a 120 or 140 in the back. And for the front, we are looking at about 40 millimeters of potential radiator usage until we start hitting that PSU shroud. Just don't forget that every radiator you install in the front, also AIO, will be limiting the potential GPU space. So you can just deduct whatever radiator you use from whatever GPU you wanted to use. So far so good, so let's now get into some features, including some that are not so good. Let's start with the front. Probably the most important feature about this case is that replaceable front panel. We already saw different implementations of this in other cases, like for example a Be Quiet Silent Base 802 would be the prime example. And even if the mesh panel requires a bit of oomph to get it in, and it doesn't really, let's say, it's not 100% aligned as it should be, it feels, or the installation approach feels better than what Be Quiet did. Instead of removing that thing by lifting it from the bottom, which obviously might or even will lead to a few failed lifting attempts of the whole case, here the panels are simply popped in and popped out using 4 little knobs. So the removal and installation is very easy, and minus that oomph part, it is the better approach. Now, before you believe that having the glass in the front will choke the fans into a different state of consciousness, it's not that bad. Left and right of the case, we got that finger-thick gap that allows them to breathe to some degree. And the same gaps also exist on the mesh panel. Just don't expect these to do anything. That's nothing but aesthetics. As you might expect, there is a change in potential performance when you switch from the glass panel to the mesh. We did a whole video just about that. I benchmarked like 6 different fan speed scenarios and configurations for both the mesh and the glass, and yes, the difference can be, I don't want to say substantial, but it can be noticeable. At the very max, we were able to observe close to 5 degrees difference in between switching the two panels. However, that was also a specific scenario. Usually we were seeing more like 2, maybe 3 degrees. Having all of the fans spin at a very slow 30%, except for the CPU fans, which were spinning at 50, everything was boiled down to a 2 degrees C difference on the CPU package. So there is definitely a difference, even with the standard fans, but that video or these benchmarks are for exactly this build, so your mileage may vary a lot. But to summarize our findings, if you were to take the glass, as it is by default, and exchange it, we saw in between 2 and 5% better CPU temps. Not the world, but definitely to consider if you want to make your fans go slower or the whole thing run a bit colder. All of that said, I like the fact that the front is interchangeable, a cool feature that gives the user the option. However, I do not appreciate the cost that it came at, because everything that you attach the front panel to needs to somehow be then attached to the chassis. And that's where all of this waste of space comes in. Even if I think it is a cool thing to, easily pop on and off that panel, for me, it's really a shame that the fan spots had to suffer, leading then to the loss of a triple 140mm fan action in the front. Another feature would be the fine nylon mesh filter sitting just on top of the fan. And the best and worst thing about it is the removal and installation. It is very easy to remove by simply pulling on that fake airflow hose part of the front, you will get it out. And the reason I call this good and bad is because reinstalling it really feels like I'm about to break it. It's... This doesn't sound good, neither does it feel good. Yeah, being made out of plastic, you can see how it feels. Once you push it in, you will never push it in as straight as you should, meaning that you will slightly tilt it and then the fun begins. And good approach, but the border at least should have been like a metal frame. But hey, it's a filter, definitely needed, as the mesh panel has like 5mm giant holes, so it's In the very least, it's very easy to clean without disassembling anything at all. The next feature about this case I would just group under the umbrella term accessibility, because Cougar did some really cool things here. Like the front fan mounting is actually not part of the case, but can be detached, allowing you to then easily work on the fans, replace the fans, install or remove fans outside the case. It's a cool feature, but it is like slightly on the pointless side if you ship the case as like a ready-to-go thing with 3 fans pre-installed, but in the end it doesn't hurt to have that feature. Like if you want to replace the fans, it's easier to do it this way. The next piece of accessibility is the top, because by removing the 2 fans that are keeping the top panel in, you can just pop it off, which makes fan installation in the top so much easier, or even accessing like the 8-pin EPS cable, connecting the CPU, fans, all of that is incredibly easy once you have the top part removed. The I/O is kind of a We got a USB Type-C 3.2 Gen 2, 2 USB 3.0s, an RGB button for the included SATA-powered ARGB controller in the back of the case, a combined IOD in and out, a relatively good start button, and a USB 2.0? Don't think I believe this to be a negative. 3 USB-A's and 1 USB-C is like at least 1 USB-A more than I'm used to in cases of this price range. I just didn't think that I would find myself in 2024 or even 23 when this case was shipped to us still using a USB 2 header on the motherboard. That led to quite the stupid issue for this build, cause the Z790 motherboard that we used kinda started to shift away from 2.0, and you got a single header, and they are basically assuming that you won't use any 2.0 headers anyway. And we had that one already filled because we used that Lian Li controller, which led us to not connect the top USB because we just don't have any left and I don't have a splitter around. So no, it's not a bad thing, it's just odd that they added this at all. Like for me, 2 is enough, 2 A's, 1 C, that would make it for the front, but it's not like a bad thing that I added a third one. It's just weird that it's 2.0. And now about cable management. In the back of the case, we got about 2.3, 2.4 millimeters worth of cable management, which I found to be plenty. It's really surprising what 0.3 or 0.4 millimeters can do. And that pad with the pre-installed Velcro strips and guiding rail makes cable management quite easy. The same for the cable management bracket in the front. It's simple, it's beautiful, and it helps keep the front look clean, and it doubles as a GPU anti-sag bracket, which is pretty cool, because you can use that little standoff to keep your GPU from breaking under its own fatness, assuming that you install a GPU that is actually long enough to reach that thing, which in my case is not happening. My GPU is a bit small. Cougar also distributed quite some holes around the case to get the cables to the back, which again was a good try, but why? They are almost all covered by a rubber, which is good, but there is none directly above the general location of a CPU fan header, and there is not a single one for the GPU power cable. Or there is only the old one at the back, like the new one where everybody drills a hole in the front, that isn't there. But hey, at least they thought about the front fans, which is quite nice for once. For storage, we got the usual thing, 2 SSD brackets behind the motherboard and a cage in front of the PSU for 2 3.5-inch drives, which can be removed by pulling it out after removing that single screw. If the cage is there, we are looking at about 180mm PSUs, and once you remove it, it's basically do whatever you want. About airflow as a whole. During our benchmarks, I could see that this thing does push some serious air, and even with the standard fans, you will do fine. Basically, all the consumer level parts, assuming you don't undersize your cooler, will work just fine. It's even with the glass, it's not like anything is choking in here. And for the most part, Cougar did a fine job with implementation. The 2 filters are very fine and let air easily pass through. All the holes are quite big and none of the spots act like a 120mm fan spot with 140mm holes. You can even install a 160 fan in the top if you really wanted to. The only thing I don't really appreciate is that the front fan spots are so short. Sure, this area had to be sacrificed for that pop feature of the front, but it's kinda sad to see form win over performance. But this also kinda ties into my, I wanna say problem, but like my general view about this case. As a whole, I believe the included mesh front panel feature to be great. The build quality of the case is really alright. Definitely not like a Fantex case or a Be Quiet level, but certainly above, for example, Montag. And I had a great time with the case. I see close to zero restrictions as far as hardware goes, except for the triple 140 or 420 red situation. And building it was very easy, especially once I removed the top, and cable management was really easy, everything was fine. But I feel like there is a lot of little bits and quirks that just haven't been thought all the way through, or there are things that were implemented without actually trying how it feels. For example, I like the front filter. However, the installation and removal process feels more like breaking it. The amount of cable holes in the back is actually fine, and the rubber is great, but not having one immediately above the CPU fan header of basically 99% of motherboards forced me to route that cable in a very stupid way. There is no hole for the GPU cable, and why does this hole deserve a rubber and this one doesn't? By default, not all ATX spacers are installed. All three on the most right side are missing by default. They are included in the box of goodies, yes, but you need to install them yourself, which is just weird. The side panel screws seem to be catching, but they kinda don't. And if we are already here, why is that handle at the top? I think I know why, and it's such a stupid reason. If you are trying to get the tempered glass panel off, you need to pop it off the magnets. Just remove the screw in the top. Okay, now in this state, you need to pull it off in the top, which theoretically sounds fine. However, the hook at the bottom is so short and its angle at which it will hang onto the chassis is so small that as soon as you just lift it off, it will just fall out. So the handle, yeah, and that was the catching screw. So the handle at the top is not necessarily like ease of use, because you could also just pull here on the back where the screw is. But unless you have the handle in your hand, like keeping it from the bottom while you're pulling it out, that thing will just fall down. So you need to pull out and immediately to the top, otherwise you saw what happened. And as long as you keep your hand in that handle, well, the panel in that case, at least it has a chance of not hitting the ground. And the same really goes for the back. Just there it's kind of more stupid because you have to pull it to the back. And if you don't pull it out in like the most straight line ever, it will just fall out. And these things kind of continue, like how close the front fabric dust filter is to the fan. It's great that it's there, it really is, but slap a 30mm thick T30 in there and watch how the fan will just try to suck that filter in. The top filter might not have the same issue, but the gluing job on the filter could definitely be improved. So as a whole, the case is fine, it works fine and it's easy to work in or work with, but it's not the ultra high quality case that I feel Cougar tried to sell it as. The thing is, I think the case is fine, and if you're liking the design and for your next build, sure, knock yourselves out. I just have a problem with the exact positioning of the case. I can get the black one for about 140 and the white one for about 150 euros here and now, which is a weird price, cause feature-wise the Duoface Pro seems to be aiming at like the high-end customizable pro-like cases. Take for example a Silent Base 802. And price-wise they are kinda in the same category. But a Silent Base is definitely on a completely other quality standard. I look at this as more of a very much pro entry-level case, stuffed with features, like a Montag case on steroids, ready to go from the start, but with that customizability option. And sturdiness, cause comparing it to Montag cases, this is sturdy, like the metal parts are sturdy as hell, except for that plastic part in the front, that could really get some more love. So as a summary, it's a fine case. You won't do anything wrong with it, but don't expect a high-end, tried and tested thing. Look at this more like an ultra high-end entry-level case. And this should be it for Cougar and their Duoface Pro RGB. At this point, a huge thank you to them for sending it over. And on a side note, we also have a Discord server, so if you want to join, the link is down below. And of course, we still have channel membership, so if you're looking for a good way to sell yourself an OG poop emoji, that's a pretty good way to go. Additionally, you can rest assured that the income will not only keep the channel afloat, but will also serve to get some glue for that filter, because that thing deserves some love too. Anyway, thank you for watching, and if you want to continue, have a look at our take on the Cougar Forza 135 that we used in this build. Quite the interesting cooler, but it's kind of more interesting with that triple fan. Hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.